Modern billionaires build mega-mansions, sprawling estates with private islands, underground bunkers, and gold-plated bathrooms. But even their wildest indulgences pale in comparison to one king's ultimate fever dream. This isn't just a palace, it's an empire of marble and grandeur, a masterpiece of ambition, built not just to house royalty, but to reshape the very idea of European power. In the mid-1700s, King Charles VII of Naples envisioned a palace so vast, so magnificent, that it would make Versailles look modest, a city within a palace within a fortress. A staggering 47,000 square meter monument to monarchy, designed to stand for eternity. And yet, this colossal dream nearly collapsed into ruin. Wars, political upheavals, and sheer neglect pushed Caserta from a king's paradise to a forgotten relic of the past. But fate had one final twist in store. This is the story of how Europe's largest royal palace was abandoned, left to rot, and then miraculously revived. In 1751, King Charles VII of Naples was not content with ruling. He wanted to redefine power itself. Rome had the Vatican, France had Versailles, but Naples, it needed a statement, a fortress of influence, a royal city that would stand as an unshakable testament to Bourbon dominance. And so, he envisioned the Palace of Caserta, an architectural marvel that would not just rival Europe's grandest palaces, but surpass them in sheer scale and ambition. To bring this vision to life, Charles VII turned to Luigi Vanvitelli, an architectural mastermind whose resume already included work on St. Peter's Basilica. But the king didn't just want a palace. He wanted a city wrapped in gold and marble. Vanvitelli's design was nothing short of revolutionary. 1,200 rooms, 1,742 windows, 34 grand staircases, and a facade stretching an imposing 247 meters. The palace wasn't just a royal residence. It would house the entire government, an administrative headquarters, and even an industrial hub with its own silk factory. In 1752, construction began. Thousands of workers, artisans, and craftsmen labored tirelessly, carving history into stone. Each corridor, each chamber, and each staircase was an assertion of power. The throne room alone contained more marble than most modern museums. Outside, a garden so vast it needed its own climate zones sprawled across the landscape, with fountains powered by a 40-kilometer aqueduct. Caserta was more than a palace. It was a declaration, a bold challenge to Europe's reigning elites. And yet, for all its grandeur, its future was anything but secure. Stepping inside the Palace of Caserta was like entering a realm untouched by time, where wealth and artistry knew no limits. Visitors found themselves surrounded by a spectacle of marble so exquisite it could rival the collections of Rome's finest museums. Every surface, floors, columns, staircases, gleamed with polished stone, while intricate frescoes adorned the ceilings, painted by Europe's most celebrated masters. Their depictions of mythology, triumph, and divine rule reinforced the palace's role not just as a residence, but as a symbol of absolute power. The throne room, the very heart of Bourbon authority, was a masterpiece of excess. Gold leaf shimmered across its vast ceilings. Chandeliers the size of carriages bathed the hall in opulent light, and every inch of the space was crafted to overwhelm. Diplomats and dignitaries who entered were left in no doubt. Naples had arrived as a dominant force in Europe. Beyond the palace walls, nature itself had been bent to human ambition. The sprawling gardens, stretching across 120 hectares, were a triumph of engineering. A 40-kilometer aqueduct, an architectural marvel in its own right, supplied water to cascading fountains that seemed to defy gravity. Marble statues lined grand reflecting pools, while manicured hedges sculpted intricate patterns into the landscape. But Caserta wasn't just about extravagance. It was also an economic powerhouse. A royal silk factory was built within the estate, intended to transform Naples into a leader in luxury textiles. Yet, even as the vision took form, tragedy struck. Luigi Vanvitelli, the mastermind behind it all, died in 1773. His son, Carlo Vanvitelli, inherited not just his father's plans but the weight of a king's expectations. Against all odds, he carried the project forward, ensuring that Caserta would take its place among Europe's greatest palaces. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Palace of Caserta stood as an unrivaled monument to Bourbon opulence. But no kingdom, no matter how gilded, can escape the tides of history. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who reshaped Europe's power structure. With the Bourbons ousted, his brother-in-law, Joachim Murat, took the Neapolitan throne, and suddenly, Caserta was no longer just a palace, it was a statement of military dominance. Under Murat's rule, the palace underwent a dramatic transformation. The delicate grandeur of its interiors was reimagined with the aesthetics of war. The Alexander Room, once a regal reception hall, was converted into a temporary throne room, its walls adorned with battle scenes. Frescoes celebrated Napoleonic triumphs, sculpted reliefs glorified military victories, and every corner of the palace began to reflect not just royalty, but raw imperial might. But the empire that sought to redefine Caserta would not last. As European politics shifted once more, the palace found itself in a constant state of flux. Each new ruler imposing their own vision, each renovation telling a different story. And yet, despite the upheaval, Caserta remained standing. It had been conceived as a symbol of absolute power, and even through the chaos, that power still echoed through its vast halls. What the Bourbons built, Napoleon altered, but history was far from finished with this palace. By the time Italy unified in 1861, the Palace of Caserta was a relic of a bygone era. No longer the seat of a ruling dynasty, it found itself stranded in political limbo. Too grand to repurpose, too expensive to maintain. The vast gardens, once a marvel of engineering and artistry, were left to nature's mercy. Fountains that once dazzled visiting dignitaries dried up. Marble floors, once gleaming under chandeliers, were now layered with dust. Vast halls that once hosted monarchs and foreign dignitaries stood eerily silent. Then came World War II. Between 1943 and 1945, the palace was no longer a royal residence but a war room. The very halls where kings and courtiers once strolled were now lined with maps and military officers. It became the headquarters of the Allied forces in Italy. Strategies for liberation were drawn up where banquets had once been held. The opulence of the past was stripped away, replaced with the cold efficiency of war. Looting was rampant. Bombs shook its very foundation, and priceless treasures vanished into the black market. Murals that had once celebrated kings were defaced, statues shattered, and golden chandeliers disappeared overnight. And after the war, silence. From the 1950s through the 1990s, the Italian government grappled with a heartbreaking dilemma: what to do with a palace too immense to sustain. Entire wings were sealed off, windows were boarded up, and the once gilded corridors became corridors of neglect. The grand ballrooms, where the elite had once danced under candlelit splendor, became storage rooms for forgotten relics. The palace that had once symbolized a king's ambitions now stood as a ghost of itself, a crumbling monument to faded glory. By the late 20th century, the Palace of Caserta stood at a crossroads: either fade into irrelevance or be restored to its former majesty. For decades, neglect and decay had chipped away at its grandeur. Marble staircases were cracked, frescoes were fading, and the once glorious gardens had turned into overgrown wilderness. Then, in 1997, history took a turn. UNESCO declared the Palace of Caserta a World Heritage Site, officially recognizing it as one of the greatest architectural and artistic achievements of the 18th century. The world had finally taken notice, and with that came a renewed commitment to save this masterpiece. But the task ahead was Herculean. By 2001, restoration efforts began, and what they found was daunting. 74,000 square meters of facades required urgent repairs. The palace's once gleaming marble, stucco, and frescoes were crumbling, dulled by time, pollution, and neglect. The ceilings that had once stunned visitors with their artistry were at risk of collapse. But piece by piece, detail by detail, teams of artisans and conservationists worked tirelessly. And then, a modern twist to the palace's fate in the wake of the global pandemic, the European Union allocated 27 million euros to aid restoration efforts. This wasn't just about saving bricks and mortar, it was about breathing life back into a national treasure. The palace gardens, once left to wither, were revived. The aqueduct, a marvel of engineering, saw its first repairs in centuries. And most symbolic of all, the grand staircase, the heart of the palace, reopened to the public, its marble steps gleaming once more. From a forgotten ruin to a world-renowned treasure, the Palace of Caserta had risen again. And yet, its story was far from over. For centuries, the Palace of Caserta was a hidden gem, known only to historians and architecture enthusiasts. But then, Hollywood came knocking. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, filmmakers searching for breathtaking, otherworldly locations discovered the palace's grandeur, and soon it became an icon on the silver screen. Star Wars fans might recognize it as Theed Palace, the regal home of Queen Amidala in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace and Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. The palace's marble halls and sweeping staircases were the perfect backdrop for a galaxy far, far away. But Star Wars wasn't the only blockbuster to bring Caserta into the limelight. Tom Cruise raced through its corridors in Mission Impossible 3, and Dan Brown's world of secrets unfolded here in Angels and Demons. With this cinematic fame came a flood of visitors. By 2021, over 80,000 tourists a month walked through its halls, bringing in revenue, funding, and renewed restoration efforts. What once stood as a forgotten relic had now found a second life, this time on the world stage. The Palace of Caserta is no longer just a relic of a bygone era. It's alive once more. What was once a fading memory of royal opulence is now a thriving cultural center, drawing in visitors from around the world. Music fills the grand halls once again as the palace hosts summer festivals, contemporary art exhibits, and exclusive tours of the royal apartments. Historians, artists, and travelers walk the same corridors that once echoed with the footsteps of kings and emperors. Its revival has not gone unnoticed. The Michelin Green Guide recently awarded the palace its prestigious third star, placing it in the same league as legendary landmarks like Pompeii and the Colosseum. But beyond the accolades, Caserta stands as a testament to resilience. Once abandoned and left to decay, it has reclaimed its status as a symbol of Italy's architectural and cultural heritage, a place where the past and present exist in perfect harmony. King Charles VII dreamed of a palace that would rival all of Europe, a monument to Naples' power and prestige. But like so many grand ambitions, it almost vanished into history, left to decay as wars, neglect, and time took their toll. Yet today, the Palace of Caserta stands restored, its fountains flowing, frescoes gleaming, and halls once again filled with life. It is a symbol of resilience, a masterpiece that defied abandonment to reclaim its place among the world's great landmarks. And this brings us to the end of today's video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.